Alright, so what have we got here? We've got the redox-os.org website, and it looks like the logo could use a little work. I don't know if this is due to Dark Reader doing this, but it's that black on black. So what we're doing here today is having a look at the news. It is a new month, and so it appears that at the very end of the month, Redox publishes a blog post, and it appears that they've been doing this going back to at least January of this year, of 2024. And inside each month, it appears to be release notes. I think it would be beneficial to Redox if, in addition to releasing these monthly release logs, if they also published if they released a new version of Redox OS, basically. My preference is the NixOS style of putting the date as the version number instead of this, because this has no real relevance to anything other than the software. I can't identify that this came out on September 9th just because it's 0.9.0. It's definitely much more convenient if this would have said 2409 or 202409, because then you can at least identify when it was released in time. And since these are monthly updates, I feel like it would make sense to have a monthly release. But I don't think they're going to release any more frequently than a month, so I feel like 24.09 would be just fine. That being said, let's have a look at what was released this month for September 2024 with Redox. It appears to be two people who write this monthly update, or at least for this month it was two people. And apparently for September, it was very exciting. It's good to see the donation options and merch options. Who are they using for donations? Patreon, DonorBox, Bitcoin, Ethereum, email. They've got t-shirts, and let's have a look at them. Ooh, there's a hoodie. Two kinds of tees, a light and a dark, but let's continue. They start out with their donations and their merch. If they wanted to receive more income, I feel like what would be most valuable, other than offering a physical item, is offering a service. So if they offered support, or if they offered a feature bounty program, I feel like those might be helpful. In any case, let's have a look at release 0.9.0. So this is one of the headlines for the September 24 blog, is 0.9 came out. That came out September 9th. Unfortunately, this was, from what I tested, there's a video on it. This was a complete mess. Their installer for Redox worked all the way up until 0.9 and then it stopped working. And I do not understand how you do that. I guess the only thing I can think is they don't have continuous integration, continuous delivery pipelines, and they don't have any sort of quality assurance automation to be sure that when a change gets pushed, it doesn't break something. I feel like in the history of tech, this is sort of always been a thing, at least in a situation where you're providing something. You test so that you're certain that what you're providing is what you promise. And Redox 0.9.0 underdelivered, where I don't understand how you break the installer for the OS and say, okay, yeah, let's ship this. This is good. Unless you're not testing. And if you're not testing, how do you know that you're shipping anything worth shipping? In any case, what is said here about 0.9.0? It came out this month. Numerous improvements, important additions. Okay. And then there's the release notes, which I was considering going through, the release notes for 0.9.0. If you would like me to review the 0.9.0 or any future release notes for Redox, just leave a comment and I can do that if there's interest. Now then, what is next after release of 0.9.0? Someone who's paid by Redox appears to have went to a conference. Cool. Is there anything valuable here? Is this worth putting in a blog post? So it looks like this is just talking about what the physical location was like. I don't know how much value that adds to Redox. So here it sounds like the person that they're paying to work on Redox who attended ResConf met people, which is kind of expected at a conference, and then they got sick from the conference. So I don't know why this is included in the monthly notes. I don't know if this provides any actual value for the Redox product. generalizing directory support for schemes. So because this is its own posting here regarding schemes, I feel like it would be helpful if there was just a small blurb about what schemes are, what they do, like what the benefit is for Redox. Because from reading this, it's not clear to me what they are or what they do, just that something happened. I don't know. Is this blog just for developers? If it is, I don't know what this is referring to in particular. So it would be nice if there was just a small breakdown of like what schemes are and what the changes were in a sense of how the end user is affected. It would be nice if that was in there, but it's not. Kernel improvements. That's good to see. Man, I don't know if I should talk about this. There was a YouTuber I tried following or subscribing to see what kind of work they do in the Linux kernel. And so this person who was putting videos on YouTube they put out videos talking about how for this particular processor architecture, there have been like critical bugs in the Linux kernel that wouldn't allow either systems with this particular processor to either it would fail to boot completely into Linux, or after 10 minutes, I think it said, or an hour, the system would crash. And that's inexcusable. Like, that's kind of the behavior you would get from faulty hardware. You should not allow that to happen in your kernel, particularly if this behavior didn't exist and then something was introduced into the code for the kernel, and then this does exist. And so in his video, he explained his process a little bit. He was bisecting. Basically, it's a binary search he was having between release versions to find when certain behaviors were introduced, which is interesting. It's reverse engineering. It's a strategy for reverse engineering. So that was interesting to me. That was worth subscribing. He pointed out where he found the bugs, which I think is beneficial. And it was from companies who paid for people to contribute code to the Linux kernel. I think ARM was one of them. So it was someone employed by ARM who provided code to the Linux kernel. And the other one, I don't recall. I believe it was like AMD or IBM who contributed code to the Linux kernel. So these are people who are paid to provide code by a hardware manufacturer, right? So you would generally want code that goes in that does not affect your hardware. In this case, I don't know how ARM would affect this other architecture, but apparently they created bugs. And so this person on YouTube created another video after that and talking about how he spent 40 hours, working, digging through the code, troubleshooting it, and determining what the issues were. And then he had published the last video. And since then, apparently some of the developers of the code that had bugs had gone in and submitted pull requests to fix their codes that he troubleshot and fixed. So that's kind of, it seems like not the most polite thing to do for these people who are getting paid to just snipe what he had discovered. In the end, as long as the kernel gets improved, that's good. As long as it gets fixed, that's ultimately the good thing. But that's kind of not a great look to be doing coming from, I don't know who it was specifically, if it's ARM or someone else that did this, but that's not great behavior. But at least it's fixed. I think the point was that this person who's putting up videos on YouTube is just very sour and bitter about the time he invested, because apparently it's unpaid time. So he doesn't have to do this. So because of that, I think I left a comment asking, if there are these bugs that exist in the Linux kernel for years, like this architecture has been broken for years, like would you consider, if you want to work on a kernel, would you consider working on the Redox kernel? Because then you're going to have significantly less legacy to troubleshoot. I mean, if you're working on the Linux kernel, then you have up to 30 years worth of legacy code to reverse engineer. Like, there could be anything in there. If you go into Redox, then it's all based on what we've learned from existing kernels, right? So there's a bigger opportunity for him to not have to deal with the situation he's in. He has options. And it was interesting seeing his response. At first, he said that other operating systems, he named 2 closed source options that are reasonably common. He wrote a comment that suggested that they have significantly more bugs than in Linux. And I don't know why he even brought up those 2 options, because I didn't. And so I asked him, because that's interesting. If the other options are significantly worse, and that's why he's working on Linux. I would like to know what these numbers are that he's referencing. And then his response reminded me of something. There's sort of fact-based information based on data, and then if you're trying to just convince someone of something based on emotion, that's propaganda. So when I asked him for the data, based on what he said, which sounded interesting, he then responded with, oh, don't you know how bad these other operating systems are? Haven't you seen all the issues? Which was interesting to hear, considering this person is someone who's like actually reverse engineering and debugging like actual logical things. And so he had no data to back up his claim. Sorry for the tangent, but on everybytecounts.org, there is information regarding everything, what things are, how things are done, and then this is raw data, right? These are numbers. These are things that can be tested by other people and reproduced. So anytime I get responses where someone disagrees with these numbers, it's interesting because there's sort of like a common pattern that you'll see where people, when they don't like what they see in this data, they will try to attack your character or say there's a flaw, but not say what the flaw is. There was someone, what's his name? Raito Bizarius, I think, with NixOS. And after the hostile takeover at NixOS, he seems to be prominent. I don't know if it was pre or post, but he was someone who just did a drive-by. Your data's wrong. And then when I ask, well, do you have more information on what's wrong? It's crickets. This is all data. Anyone can reproduce this. So back to the point about asking this person who's reverse engineering the Linux kernel, like clearly you're sour and bitter about this whole situation, but this is the technology you want to work on. If you want to work on kernels, there is Redox. His response to that after the last propaganda response was, okay, so I had to look it up. But I see what their response to me was when I asked if they considered Redox as something to work on. And their response was, no thanks. I need my systems working yesterday, and my brain does not like Rust and Cargo. So I guess in a way, to me, that's understandable. If they want to stay stuck, mired in the 30 years of legacy C code, then that's totally fine. They can do that. But at that point, it's not really worth watching them or following them on YouTube if what they're trying to market is bitterness and sourness over how unfair things are because he's doing something for free. The other thing is, if he's complaining about, it sounds like he's suggesting that Redox doesn't work, but it sounds like these years-old bugs in the Linux kernel means that it wasn't working either. So it's not any better with the Linux kernel, and he's pointed it out himself that these bugs have been in the kernel for years. That sort of argument feels like it has a lot of holes in it when it comes to he needs something that works yesterday. And the other thing is, if he doesn't like Rust, he's got 30 years worth of Linux kernel code to go through. So that's great. So sorry for the tangent. Let's get back to the Redox September updates. Kernel improvements. That's good. There are improvements in the kernel. Let's have a look at what some of these are. Panic stack trace handling. Okay. So I'm wondering, is this like a fix that is beneficial for developers? It would kind of be nice if this was... I just see information and data in tables. It would be nice if the table said like who or what this benefits, what the change was. In any case, the RISC-V memory paging code in the RMM crate was fixed. The size of some CPU-specific code was reduced, simplifying portability to new CPU types and reducing the maintenance cost. It would be nice if these were a bit simpler. Yeah, it would be nice if it said like what the purpose was of the change and who the change was for. Like, is it for the users? Is it for developers? Is it for something like a paid bounty? It would be nice if it said why each of these things were happening and what the change was. I guess why, what, and who. Time, precision, and reliability of TSC was improved. I'm not sure what TSC is. It would be nice if like these were simplified so that users could read them, because you're gonna have in your software significantly more users than developers. And maybe that's Redox's goal, is that it's an operating system for developers, but there's a huge market of people who would be so grateful if they didn't have to deal with the 30 years of legacy C code, as pointed out by that YouTuber. Anyways, let's continue. Re-implemented a scheme-related TLB optimization. I do not know what a TLB is, or what a scheme relation is to that. Temporarily removed as a result of a fix for a scheme bug prior to 0.9.0. So it sounds like they pulled something out and they put it back in fixed. Queued POSIX signals was merged. Yeah, like I feel like these are all inconsistent. I'm guessing it's because they're self-reported, maybe, and there's not someone managing this information. Like I could see a table of data where there's like 5 columns maybe, like who led the work or did the work or contributed, who the work was for, what the work was, and why it was done. Because I don't think it needs to say was merged, what the status might be a column in that data. Merged, not yet merged, planned. This information is kind of scattered, and I don't know if there's like anyone leading, if there's any sort of leadership for these blog posts and data understandability for people. In any case, let's keep going. Bump allocator initialization was fixed. I do not know what a bump allocator is. Yeah, like some of these, it would be nice if there's just like a link to what the thing is that they're talking about, just so that more people could understand if they wanted to. The FDT library was updated to the latest version. Is this worth putting in here for kernel improvements? You would think that generally you would want to keep these things up to date, and is this worth a bullet point? I don't know. A panic on dirent was fixed. See, it's interesting because there's like this and this where it's not attributed to anyone, but the rest are attributed. Like, this is not consistent the way the information is presented. I don't know, whoever is working on these blogs or the leadership before that, it would be nice if you had someone with a little bit more vision to improve this whole thing. And I say this because on the 0.9.0 release, there was a post about it when it went up, and I remember I commented on it because for anyone that's worked with document writing or just in general working with large language models, there's a point where you get a certain amount of experience and you recognize when something went through ChatGPT or Claude. You can recognize it just based on sort of like the patterns and the wording. And so I remember when the 0.9.0 release blog post came out, I commented on a public space for Redox, this looks like it was written by ChatGPT. I'm not saying it was good or bad. I was just sort of pointing it out because anyone who's worked with AI enough will recognize when someone just fed something into it and copy and pasted right back out of it. And so I commented that, and I got so much hate for that. So I didn't expect so much hate from the Redox community sort of commenting on an observation that doesn't actually change anything about the release. It just looks like somebody either was trying to cut corners or optimize their writing. So I didn't expect so much hate from the Redox community. But there are opportunities. I can see why they put it through ChatGPT. There are opportunities where these things can get improved, and hearing what suggestions a large language model might have is I think totally valuable, worth having, but I probably wouldn't want to copy and paste directly from it using its own wording. In any case, let's move on to what's next. Driver improvements. Kernel panic due to uninitialized PCI bar was fixed. So I'm wondering if this is related to that thing where if you use in Virt Manager, when you open a new virtual machine, it uses ICH6, I think, and by default. And if you use that, Redox will just fail to boot. It will just stop booting. It will start and it will just hang. And it would be nice to know if this was related to that. So I guess another thing, like if I were to present this data, I would have a table-like format, and I guess this would be the 6th or 7th column, and I would list, the actual GitLab issue here. So you could easily click on it and sort of see what the process was and what was reviewed. So anyone that's interested in these kinds of things, it's just easier for them. Like it's a one-click thing. They can go and say, oh, so-and-so worked on this. Oh, and that's how they did that. I wonder why they did it that way. They could go and add comments to the GitLab. I mean, there's just more engagement that way. Yeah, and the other thing is, like I mentioned, while these blogs are monthly, they're not actually they're not creating a monthly release, like a point-in-time release where they can say, oh, well, if you go to this release, you're going to have this fixed. Like, if I wanted to see if this worked, this change that they wrote about, I would have to go to their GitLab. I have to go and search for, PCI bar or kernel panic? I don't know what I would search for. Or things involving Tim. I would have to go onto their GitLab and search. And that's just like a lot of steps or hurdles I guess, everyone would have to do it that wants to actually go and work on this, but just leaving the link here would be like a significant improvement, in my opinion. Anyways, what else is there for driver improvements? So there's a version 2 of the Scheme protocol. I don't know what that is, but the SD card reader for Raspberry Pis was updated to use whatever the Scheme 2 version 2 protocol is. Yeah, like if there was a link to the GitLab issue, which I'm assuming they have for this, it would be great because you can click on it and then maybe there might be more information on what a Scheme protocol is or the version 2 of it, why they moved to the version 2. Like, it would be great if they listed the GitLab issues next to each of these. I mean, maybe that alone would be a huge improvement. USB improvements. Okay, so it looks like there was work previously on USB XHCI. There was documentation written for it, which is great, but they don't say where the documentation was written. There's no link to it, and they're trying to bring it into compliance with standard and real hardware behavior. Okay, that's interesting. relibc improvements. What is relibc? Is that something to do with Rust and C libraries? Support merge for real-time POSIX signals. Endian function was implemented. See, and this is another one where it's inconsistent, where like sometimes it attributes someone and then sometimes it doesn't, and then sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Like, these are all inconsistent. So I can sort of understand why that 0.9.0 release that I was downvoted for commenting that it was ran through GPT. I can understand why they ran it through GPT if it made all this a bit more consistent. It looks like someone's just sort of copy and pasting these things. It's not consistent. That's fine if this is just sort of thrown together. They have to get something out on the last day of the month, but there's like 2 people, and I don't know how their time is budgeted for this, but I feel like there's just small things that can be done that might be more helpful to people. So the Endian function was implemented. I do not know what an Endian function, but it would be nice if there was a link to the GitHub that sort of explained the situation here around this. Poll was improved to follow the Linux system call behavior more accurately. Linux system call behavior. So I'm guessing relibc has to do something with translation for Linux C code to run on Redox? Is that what this is? Redox libc? It'd be nice if these were like made for people with smoother brains like me to understand. I'm just a user, I would love to contribute more, but they ain't making it easy. And translating paths that don't have an explicit scheme, the ability to choose the default scheme was added. See, now, like, whoever wrote this, it's very clear. Like, I don't know what the schemes are, but from the way this was written, it makes it more understandable in what was happening. They added a default scheme. Cool. Now, I feel like this is written well. Like, I wouldn't need to go and read, like, the GitLab for this situation, but it would be nice if it was linked. Nice for me. Okay, so the POSIX abstraction layer component to use Rust error handling was changed. The interface to both Redox and Linux stays in safe Rust as long as possible, pushing C-style error handling into the interface layers. Okay, that's sort of interesting. Moved UMask to regular global variable. Okay, that's interesting. Is that like an environmental, when it says global variable, is that an environmental variable, or is that something different for UMask? Is that just the default UMask? Yeah, this is maybe just another layer that I'm not familiar with. Added a test for signal stack function. Man, I think it's fantastic if they're adding testing to their code. They could certainly use it, but is this worth putting in as a bullet point for relibc improvements? Maybe if there was second section just for what testing has been added, because testing is valuable, or maybe in the past you would have just assumed that testing was written and then this wouldn't be worth putting in a bullet point. I don't know. What are we even doing here? A stub for network interface H was added. Header? Network interface header was added? A stub. Is this just like a to-do that someone created? This is another one where I'm not sure why it's in here. It's just, maybe it needs to be more clear. There needs to be more clarification of what this is and why this is listed. Yeah, just like these, they've had 9 months to go through these. I haven't gone through the January to see how it was, but I'm hoping that in those 9 months there have been some sort of improvement in how these blog posts were written. Yeah, like I feel like this shouldn't be a monthly blog. It should be a monthly release, and these are the release notes of that release. That would make more sense to me. I feel like when you have this perpetual daily builds available, you don't have sort of your users grouped into using the latest release. Like, I wonder what percentage of people who use Redox was using 0.8.0 for 2 years before the 0.9.0 came out. And when the 0.9.0 came out, you can't install it because the installer is broken. So you're kind of, it seems like Redox is sort of forcing users into, you have to use the daily. And if you use the daily, there's no sort of support of like, oh yeah, we fixed this in this version, because there's no version in between. There's only dailies. So this is like not a great situation for the users to be in, having to deal with 2 years in between the last release. And I don't understand why they have a monthly blog instead of a monthly release. And these are just release notes for each monthly release. So that's something where like in my head, it's there's rust growing on the hamster wheel. Okay, so relibc improvements cope with legacy schemes until they are updated. Added code to cope with man, I don't know why, but some of these is this intended to be funny? The way this is written just sounds like comedy to me. I don't know who this guy is, but he's funny. He has other things that are well written as well, but it seems like there's a range. Well, I guess that wasn't written by him. PLIMKILDE implemented awaites Rust iterators on C-style strings. So this is interesting. I'm guessing this is either some sort of Redox to C implementation, like because Redox is in Rust, this is like a Rust Redox specific library for C. Like, I don't know what this is. It would be nice if there was like a small blurb or a link to what is relibc. In any case, let's continue. RISC-V port. So the RISC-V port was started, and there were improvements to the tool that were sent to the tool chain. Yeah, I feel like some of these things can just be improved. Like, I imagine like if you're a developer and you're writing these things, you're just trying to explain what you're doing, because at this level, it's almost like art, like the difficulty in explaining what you're doing, which is amazing. Like, this is fantastic work when it becomes this difficult to sort of explain what it is. But if there was a GitLab link, that might be helpful in explaining what the situation is. So, Q emulator ports. The man himself, Jeremy, updated the QEMU patches to the latest working version and is working on the remaining bugs. The hope is that QEMU will be ported soon. Oh, so is this for running QEMU on Redox? When that happens, man, so many things are going to change. As soon as you can run like virtualization in Redox, man, so many things are going to change. This is a game changer right here. Anything to do with emulation on Redox is going to be a game changer. The only problem I have is how many outstanding bugs there are that just don't get updated for months. Like, there are like a number of things that can be addressed at Redox, and one of them is like handling issues. Like, I don't really want to, but I feel like I should, for demonstration purposes, show what the issue situation is. Like, it's kind of annoying navigating the website to get to their GitLab. Plan issues, here we go. While there is a ratio, I feel like a ratio is not a good way to go by when evaluating your metrics on issues. So there's 912 issues open, so that's interesting. 742 of them were closed. That's great, but 170 are still open. And what I would like to know is what the oldest one is. 4 years. Implement copy and paste. So there are issues that have been open for 4 years. Wow. Because there's just basic things in the operating system that are just broken, and I don't know if it's from Redox or with the application or both. I feel like here there should be like an option of like bug bounty. Like, I will donate, but this bug needs to get fixed. So when I donate, please put the money that's going here towards someone who's going to look into this major issue. If there were like bounties here or feature requests, I feel like that would be a huge win for Redox for bringing in income to support the product. I guess it's up to the leadership what they decide to do. Hopefully what they decide to go with at Redox is better than the whole situation with Linux or the past who knows how long. Programs. The DD tool from UUtils was fixed. This is a disk drive tool for UUtils. It doesn't say what was broken. Yeah, I just feel like these could be a little bit more descriptive. Like, some of these are really long and some of these are really short. It would be nice if these were a little bit more consistent. Fixed pipe event handler which was causing issues in Rust Python. That's interesting. Perl 5 recipe was fixed. See, like when I see these, I want to know, was it working and then it broke? Or was this never working? NeoVim is being ported. Like, is this worth bringing up as a bullet point? NeoVim is being ported? Like, how many applications are being ported? I feel like that should be its own separate list of like, here are the applications we are porting to be packaged or to be able to run on Redox. I feel like this should be its whole own section. This, I feel like, doesn't fit in with break fix stuff. Started the drop bear SSH porting. So I know that Alpine Linux offers drop bear SSH. So that's interesting to see that there's porting. Next, Ion improvements. Ion is the shell that Redox comes with. So instead of the born again shell, they have Ion. And I believe Ion is written in Rust. I mean, like, I feel like this should be a hyperlink so that people know what Ion is, or if there's just a small verb, Ion is the shell that's shipped with Redox. The home environmental variable to tilde replacement was fixed. Interesting. So I wonder which one was broken, using tilde or using the home environment variable. That's interesting. Is this worth having as its own section? Because this is an application within. I feel like if you have programs, this should be a sub under programs, like Ion, because Ion is one of the programs that's part of Redox. I don't know. Continuous integration improvements. Support for kernel unit test and continuous integration added. For real, QEMU-based continuous integration testing. Redoxer will need to be fixed. Wow. So I wonder why there's a to-do in the release notes or the monthly blog. Should this be here? Next. Podman by default. Now Podman is our default build method. It was enabled in our build system. It allows us to have reproducible environment for all developers. I feel like this should not be the headline. I feel like the headline should be build system. Like this should be underneath the build system section that says Podman by default. The Podman container environment is using Debian 12 and prevents many bugs caused by build environment differences. Wait, so they're building Redox on Debian 12? I know that they said that there's been work in building Redox on Redox. Is it just not built into their build system? I feel like I have more questions than answers coming out of these release notes. Build system improvements. See, I feel like this Podman thing should be under here, under build system improvements. Podman was enabled by default. I feel like this and this is the same thing, but this is just more words to clarify what happened. This is just kind of weird to me to read. Like the structure, like did no one read all the way through this and say like, hey, this and this are exactly the same thing, and it's like one after the other, so if you're reading it continuously, I feel like you should notice these things. Anyways, build system improvements. Path data type was implemented on Cookbook to specify a local folder. It reduced the size of scripts. Path data was implemented on Cookbook to specify Cookbook of what? I don't understand. So are they using Chef or something and they're using cookbooks? Like, it would be helpful if this was clearer what this meant. Like, I know if you use Ansible, there you have playbooks, and it would be worth saying, in our Ansible playbook, this is the behavior we changed in it. But it just says cookbook, so I'm not certain what that is. Fuse fixed on Podman. On Podman containers? On Podman. This is not super clear what happened here or why. The libtool dependency on the Podman container was fixed. Nice job, libtool dependency. Oh wait, so was it broken? Man, it would be nice if these things were tracked like this was working and then it broke because of this or that. I guess if there was a GitLab issue here, you could go and see what it was and why, but just this description is not super helpful. Like, as someone who's reading through this should just flow. Like, any user should be able to read through this and be like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Oh, what's that? I'd be interested in learning more about that. Click, but that isn't how it is. OpenSSH was installed on the Podman container for developers using SSH. Man, so this just sounds like the wrong way to be doing things. This is 100% the wrong way to be doing things. You should not be installing SSH in your containers if it's in regards to your build system. Anytime you make a change in your repository, that should be changing the continuous integration. Your pipeline should be triggered to make a new build. I don't know why you would want to SSH into a container on a build system. Like, they should be producing artifacts that you use somewhere else. Yeah, so like for this one, it would be really great if there was like a link to a GitLab issue, because I don't understand the purpose of doing this. Like generally, you shouldn't want to do this. This is like one way to do it, but not a good way of doing it. In any case, it kind of sucks that these are like dead ends. Like if I want to learn more about this, I have to leave this blog post and go into the GitLab. It's not like an easy like click this, read what I need to read, and then come back. Next, documentation improvements. Boot process documentation was improved. It would kind of be nice if it said what the improvements were or why they wrote improvements to them. Clarified the system call explanation to address the confusion with POSIX system calls and Linux system calls. Okay, so that actually sounds helpful. That's pretty cool. Why is documentation in double quotes? The documentation page of the website was updated to add the libredox documentation. Is libredox the same as relibc? Is this a different thing? Documentation and remove the Redox syscalls documentation. So is this related to this? Redox syscalls and the syscalls? Here, POSIX syscalls versus Linux system calls? Added the benchmarks section on the performance page of the book. I don't understand why there's a book. To explain how to do simple benchmarks on Redox. You can read the section on this link. Finally, there's a link. Thank you for putting a link. Let's have a look at it. Oh, come on, guys. Why would you put a link and it's 404? This is the stuff I'm talking about. This is the failures I'm talking about, like in the 0.9.0 release. Like, how do you put in a link in your release notes and it's 404? How do you end up doing this? Like, is it because of this? No, the page doesn't exist. How does this end up happening? Where someone's like, yeah, this link's good, ship it. And then no one clicks on it to see if the link actually works. Let's see if I can find benchmarks. And then there's, yeah, cool. So there's nothing for benchmarks. Like, is there a way of even knowing? Chapter 9, performance. So it must be this 9.10 performance. So how far off was there? See, like their link is way off. The kernel profiling, benchmarks, RAM benchmark, but this is a disk command. 0, null. Oh. So does this load stuff into memory when you run this? Because it's not going anywhere? It's pulling from scheme 0. Is that like dev 0? It's pulling zeros from this and it's putting it into null and 1024. I'm guessing this loads it into RAM. So is this like a time-based test? Like, do you run this with time at the beginning and then you see how long it takes for this command to complete? Like, I feel like this is severely lacking information on what this is and how this benchmark works. But at least it's documented, so that's a good start. File system read benchmark. So this would be an interesting actual command to run, because when you install, it takes so long to copy the files, and it's a small amount of files to copy from the image to disk. It takes so long. I want to say like 15 or 20 minutes for like a couple hundred megs of data. Like, it's not a lot of data, but it seems like a large number of files, and they're all like icon images. It's odd. I don't know why there's so many icon images bundled, but add the Neverball recipe on your file system image. Okay, it's interesting that these benchmarks at least say what the benchmark is trying to do and then the command, but it would be nice if there was more information on like what it's doing and what you're testing for. But this is a good start. File system write. Is a read benchmark? Is a write benchmark? Okay. So these are kind of interesting because you can use this to compare against other operating systems where you can also run these commands or similar commands. So that's cool. But it was just like a huge fail in that this is 404, a link in their own release notes. It isn't like a third party who goofed. This is something they put in, and they're like, oh yeah, we reviewed everything in this to make sure that documentation we put up is solid, you know? That didn't happen. Also, things like this sentence ends with a period. This does not. This does not. There's like so many small inconsistencies. Like this sentence ends with a period, but this does not. So I mean, I totally recognize why they would have fed their release into ChatGPT, but ever since the pitchforks came out from the Redox community after me for mentioning it, it looks like they don't use ChatGPT. They didn't use it for this, so wow. I mean, I think it's great that they're doing this monthly release log, even though they're not releasing software, just notes about updates for their dailies, I guess. It'd be great if there was, someone more experienced working on these, or leadership that's actually reading through and making sure that all these things that is written about their software is actually true and readable and understandable for the community. I mean, I guess if this is for developers, they don't really need a community. Just developers can go and read the code. At which point, what's the purpose of this blog? So, this was the bad link. That's where we left off. Documentation on how to get the CPU information and show system log in the task page. Okay, that's cool. It would be cool if there's like a tool written. I guess maybe a tool isn't needed. See, look, it's the same format. This is going to be 404.2. Man, this is... So before there's a release for Redox, anything they release, it would be great if someone actually went through and reviewed what is written and said about it, because this is just bananas to me that these are just 404s. And this information didn't come out today. This was days ago, and apparently no one's read it or clicked on it or reported any of these things. That's a little sad. Sorry. Okay, and last, oh man, the chapter numbers were removed from the page names to remove maintenance cost, move pages on the book summary. Is this why these are broken now? Because if you look at the URL on the bottom, chapter, did this change? Did this person change this, but not change the links afterwards? I don't understand. Let's move on. Organization improvements. Remove the tracker issue index in favor of GitLab filters to track development priorities, reducing the maintenance cost. Maintenance cost. What maintenance cost? Reducing the maintenance cost of what? Man, like, the wording on this, my gut feeling when I read these is like, I'm trying to justify the work that I'm doing, and the way I'm justifying it is by saying it was for a maintenance cost. Let's move on. Package Ubuntu wallpapers, gross. From most recent versions and Pop! OS wallpapers. Isn't this Redox OS? Why are you bundling Ubuntu and Pop! OS? Like, wallpapers should be considered like logos. That's sort of like your fingerprint. People will identify your operating system just by your wallpaper. Like when I talk about the green hills and the blue skies with some white clouds, you can get an idea of which operating system that might be if you go back far enough in time. Rather than adding another operating system's wallpapers, it would be great if they just made more of their own, or if they put out to the community like, hey, we'll pay you if you make a Redox OS wallpaper. Whoever the winner is of this competition, we will pay you for that wallpaper. Like, that seems like a better use of time than pulling wallpapers from other distributions. This is kind of wild to me. You're using someone else's like branding in your operating system. Wow. Like, you could have a whole art community around Redox OS building out Redox things with their creativity. That's not what's happening. Yikes. Join us on Matrix Chat. If you want to contribute, give feedback, or listen in to the conversation, join us on Matrix Chat. I mean, I guess the listen in is probably the biggest thing, because I remember Jeremy Solar on a podcast talking about like, hey, yeah, if you do something in GitLab, post about it in the Matrix Chat so that we can see it, which is just like an odd thing to me. You would think that if they want to see it in the Matrix Chat, they would have some sort of trigger in their GitLab to automatically push notification to their Matrix track anytime there's sort of like an update, an issue, if there's an update or if there's a new issue created. Like, I feel like that should automatically get pushed to Matrix if that's where they expect the notifications to be. But from my experience, after hearing that podcast and hearing like, oh yeah, you have to go and make the ticket, no one's going to see it unless you go and paste it in the Matrix track. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, but whatever, I'll go and paste it. And I paste it, and then it was just crickets. So I don't understand what the purpose was. I mean, do they just see it and not acknowledge it? If that's the point, then I feel like telling people to manually go in and do this thing that can be automated is not ideal. So I'm not a big fan of advertising this, considering when I go in there, either I don't get help or it's crickets. And you could build this up, but you need people. You probably need to actually pay for people to be in there actually being helpful. But I don't know. That's just an idea. So discussion. Here are all the places you can go, different community places. I feel like this is probably the most open source option. It's going to this because this is for the project specifically. I don't understand why you would come to Redox and then this would be listed, just an individual. It's a little weird, but whatever. Do they have a discussion on Patreon? This is like a paid discussion, so that's interesting. And then there's places where they will just harvest your data for AI, and I don't recommend going there. So I feel like this is the free place to go for discussion. But you know what? This is just for posting. This is like a one-way conversation. This is the Redox broadcasting sort of messages. I feel like this is not inaccurate. This should not be under discussion. I mean, I guess you can comment under the post, but it's not like an open discussion. Maybe Patreon is that? I don't know. I feel like all this could be reviewed and overhauled potentially. But yeah, so that's it for September monthly update. I still don't understand why they aren't releasing a new version of the software, 9.1 or 24.09 or 24.09.30. If there was a new release of the software, then I understand why you would talk about what the updates are. But talking about the updates, and then where do I go to see these? Oh, I have to go to a daily? Oh, which daily do I go to? Like, it's a little bit of a sad state. I imagine Jeremy is under so much pressure and has so much to do because he's building out the Cosmic desktop environment, or he's involved with that for Pop OS. This is like a side project. I feel like this has not graduated to somebody's full time, or if it has, it just doesn't feel like it from the user perspective. I mean, on the back end, I'm sure they're doing a bunch of great work. You see, there's like a handful of people who are working on this actively. Hopefully, they're all being paid. If you'd like me to go through the release notes for 0.9.0, I can. I feel like for 0.9.0 that's not ideal because I already put out that video where basically 0.9.0 is broken. You cannot install it. So for me, it's sort of like not worth talking about. But if there's any other software you would like to see reviewed, their updates, I would consider Alpine Linux if they put monthly things. From what I remember, it being pretty concise. Maybe that might be reviewing just as a comparison to see how this new project, Redox, compares versus Alpine. I wonder when they were started. I think Alpine might have been around 2013 and Redox might have been started around the same time. So that's kind of interesting. But I guess, Redox is starting from scratch, completely fresh code in Rust versus Alpine building on top of legacy C code. So, I mean, you kind of have like a expiration date with Alpine that you can see coming. You don't really see that on Redox. Just whether Redox will be able to learn how to swim before it sinks. Hopefully it doesn't sink, because this is like the best option that I'm aware of for our future in open source operating systems. See you next time.